where every paw print matters. From first vaccines to final goodbyes, we walk every step with your best friend. Because at Noble Nest, pets aren't patients, they're family. He waited by the gates for 7 years, through storms, snow, and silence. Not for food, not for shelter, but for the one person he refused to forget. And when that man finally stepped out of prison, the dog didn't hesitate. He ran. Because some bonds don't fade with time, they only grow stronger in the waiting. It started on a rainy Tuesday in a town no one ever really talks about. You wouldn't find it in travel blogs or state guides. Just a few stoplights, a rusting gas station, and a prison whose fences seemed to stretch longer than the horizon. People came and went mostly unnoticed. Except when the dog showed up with no collar, no leash, and no explanation. Just a soaked coat, matted ears, and the kind of eyes that already knew disappointment. He stood at the edge of the prison's parking lot, right by the bus stop where freshly released inmates would sometimes get dropped off. He didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't approach anyone. Just sat. Still, like he'd already made a choice the world hadn't caught up with yet. At first, the guards thought he belonged to someone nearby, maybe a stray that'd gotten lost or dumped out of a car like so many others in that area. But when he didn't move for hours, then days, curiosity turned to concern. They called animal control. A van came. 2 workers stepped out with gloves and a catch pole, but the dog just sat there, eyes fixed on the chain, link gates like he was waiting for them to open. When they got close, he didn't growl. He didn't run. But he also didn't let them take him. He backed just out of reach every time, tail down, gaze unwavering. A week passed, then 2. The rain stopped, then started again. Still the dog remained. Locals began to notice. A cafeteria worker named June started leaving scraps out by the fence after her shift. At first it was sandwich crusts, then full burgers wrapped in napkins, then even bowls of warm broth in the winter. He'd eat, only once she left, and then returned to his post. They started calling him Rusty. No one knew why exactly. Maybe it was the reddish tint to his fur when the sun hit just right. Maybe it was the way his joints moved, stiff like old hinges. But the name stuck, and so did he. Guards joked about it. Rusty's the most loyal inmate we've got, one would say during roll call. Another would laugh, he's doing a life sentence voluntarily. But under the sarcasm was a growing unease. No dog waits that long without a reason. And Rusty wasn't just loitering, he was watching. Every van that came, every bus that stopped, every man that walked through those gates, eyes blinking into freedom. Rusty would perk up, his ears would tilt, and then, every time, his body would sink just a little lower when it wasn't what he was waiting for. Years went by. 7 of them. Summer into fall, fall into winter, snow piling up against the fence and melting into spring puddles. Rusty aged, his coat lost its shine, his muzzle grayed, his once sharp eyes grew foggy, but the focus never left. Someone, somewhere, had promised him something, or maybe not with words but with love. Maybe Rusty had simply decided, this is where I wait. And nothing, not hunger, not loneliness, not time, could pull him away. People started leaving water bowls. Some brought him old blankets. One woman even tried to adopt him. She pulled up in a red minivan, opened the passenger door, and whispered, "Come on, boy. You don't have to do this anymore." Rusty sniffed her hand, licked it, then turned around and walked right back to his spot. Like he was saying, "Thanks, but I've got something to finish." Nobody knew where he'd come from, but prison staff began to wonder if he belonged to someone inside. Records were checked. Files were scanned. Hundreds of mugshots printed and laid out on a table, but Rusty gave no answers. He just kept waiting. Then came the day things changed. A new corrections officer, young guy named Mateo, transferred in from another county. First week on the job, he saw Rusty and asked the others what the deal was. They gave him the whole rundown over bad coffee. Mateo didn't laugh. He just stared at the dog for a long time, then said softly, "That's not just any dog. That's a heart that never gave up." He started bringing Rusty real food. Chicken, beef, once even salmon from his mom's kitchen. Rusty still wouldn't let him touch him, but he'd eat a little closer each day. Mateo was patient. He didn't rush it. He knew wounds that deep didn't heal with a single meal. One day, Mateo did something no one expected. He brought out a photograph. It was old, crinkled at the edges. Showed a teenage boy, skinny, wild-eyed, posing with a dog that looked almost exactly like Rusty, only younger, stronger, standing on a patch of grass that looked like someone's backyard. The boy in the photo, that was Mateo's older brother, Luis. Luis had been sentenced to 10 years for something stupid when he was 19. A robbery gone sideways. No one got hurt, but it was enough. He'd been inside ever since. Mateo was only 10 when it happened. Too young to understand, too old to forget. He remembered the dog more than anything. The way Luis hugged him tight when the cops came. The way the dog howled for hours after they took him away. That dog's name was Rocco, and Rocco had vanished not long after. Everyone assumed he ran off, maybe hit by a car, maybe taken in by a stranger. But now, staring at Rusty through the prison fence, Mateo felt his heart clench. Could it really be him? 7 years was a long time, but love, real love, doesn't always follow rules. He knelt down, holding the photo out, voice shaking. "Rocco," he whispered. The dog looked up, blinking. "Rocco, it's me, Mateo, Luis's brother. You remember, Rusty." Rocco took one step forward, then another, and for the first time in all those years, he let someone touch him. Mateo cried, right there on the gravel. Guards stepped out. Inmates peeked through barred windows. The sky cracked open in a soft drizzle, and the dog who had waited for 7 years finally leaned into the warmth of that remembered him. But that wasn't the end. Not even close. Because Luis was still inside, and he had no idea his best friend hadn't forgotten. Mateo didn't sleep much that night. He kept replaying the moment in his head, when the dog leaned in, when that deep, unspoken recognition passed between them like a thread being stitched back through time. His hands still smelled faintly of damp fur and old leaves. Rocco, if that was truly his name, had finally let someone in. But not just anyone, Mateo, the little kid who used to ride a tricycle around the backyard while Rocco chased him in dizzy circles. He dug through a box of old photos at his mother's house, found more snapshots of Luis and Rocco together. One in particular made his chest ache. Luis, lying in the grass, Rocco's head on his chest, both of them smiling. He couldn't remember when that photo was taken, but Luis looked peaceful, young before the world turned its back on him. He printed the picture and brought it to work the next day. When he approached the fence, Rocco was already waiting. He'd moved a little closer to the gate now, as if sensing that time was catching up with them. Mateo knelt down, held the photo up. "You remember this?" he asked quietly. Rocco sniffed it. His eyes lingered on the paper longer than a dog should have, and then, just like before, he pressed his head gently into Mateo's palm. A silent yes. The prison warden got wind of what was happening. At first, he rolled his eyes, just another stray making headlines. But when he saw the photo, when he heard the full story, something shifted in his face. He called Mateo into his office and asked one question. "You think Luz knows?" Mateo shook his head. "I doubt it. He probably thinks Rocco's long gone." The warden leaned back in his chair. "Well, maybe it's time we tell him." The next day, Luis was called to visitation. He walked in slow, guarded, dressed in faded blue. Time had carved shadows under his eyes. His knuckles bore faint scars, souvenirs from forgotten fights. But when he saw Mateo, something softened. A flicker of the old Luis. They sat. Mateo slid the photo across the table. Luis stared at it, then up at his brother. "Where'd you get this?" "From Mom's box." But that's not the important part. Luis tilted his head. Mateo swallowed. "He's alive. Rocco, he's been waiting, outside the prison, for 7 years. Silence fell between them like a dropped plate. Luis blinked, shook his head. "Nah, that can't be right." He ran off. "Back when they took me, we looked, remember? Posters, flyers. I thought he was dead. I thought so too. But he's there. Every day, right by the gates. Won't leave. Won't follow anyone. Until now, he let me touch him." Luis. He remembers. Luis leaned forward, his face twitching like it couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. "You're serious?" Mateo nodded, dead serious. Luis sat back, exhaled so deeply it sounded like a prayer. His hands trembled on the tabletop. "That dog, he was the only one who never judged me. When I messed up, when the cops came, when the cuffs clicked, I looked back and he was still wagging his tail like I hadn't ruined everything." Mateo was quiet. Luis continued, his voice cracking. "I used to dream about him, you know. First couple years in here. Thought I was losing it. Some nights, I swear I could hear him outside. Mateo said softly, "You weren't wrong." That day changed everything. News traveled fast. Guards whispered it during rounds. Inmates leaned against cell bars, asking if the rumors were true. Was the dog real? Was he really still out there, waiting like some four-legged ghost? A local reporter caught wind and came sniffing around. She wrote an article, "The Dog Who Waited 7 Years of Loyalty Outside the Gates." It spread faster than wildfire. People across the state read it. Donations came in. Animal welfare groups offered to help. Someone even mailed a custom-built DOS was name painted in goldy. Rocco. But Rocco didn't want a house. He just wanted his person. And Luis, after all this time, was still behind bars. The warden moved in ways he never expected to be, filed a request. Luis had been a model prisoner for years. No fights, no contraband. Volunteered in the prison kitchen, mentored younger inmates. His parole hearing was scheduled for 9 months later. But the warden pushed for emergency review. He wrote in his recommendation, "It's not every day you see a man loved so deeply by something so pure for so long. Maybe that says more than a file ever could." The parole board agreed to a hearing. Luis was stunned. Mateo came to tell him the news in person. Luis laughed, chalked, then whispered, "I don't know if I'm ready." "You've been ready," Mateo said. "You just forgot how to believe it." The day of the hearing, Rocco sat by the fence, as always. But this time a small group of people stood near him. Reporters, locals, prison staff, even strangers who'd read the article and driven miles just to see the dog with the unbreakable heart. Inside, Luis spoke with more honesty than he ever had. "I messed up. I know that. I've spent every day trying to make it right. But that dog, he never needed me to explain. He just waited. I don't know what that says about him, or about me. But if he can forgive me, maybe I'm not beyond saving." The board deliberated for hours. Outside, the sun began to set, and Rocco waited. Same spot, same silence. But this time, people around him weren't ignoring him. They were watching him like a living miracle. Someone handed Mateo a folded note. It was from a woman whose son had been released from that very prison years ago. She'd written, "My son came out alone. No one was there. But this dog, he gives people hope, even if they don't know why." Finally, the doors opened. Luis stepped out, not in cuffs, not in uniform, but in worn jeans, a clean shirt, and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen real sunlight in a lifetime. The crowd stood. Luis took one step, then another. The dog's body trembled. For a moment, he didn't move, like his brain couldn't quite believe what his heart already knew. And then, like thunder breaking through glass, Rocco bolted. Straight into Luis's arms. They hit the ground hard. Dust kicked up. Luis sobbed. Rocco whined, tail wagging so fiercely it blurred. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't cinematic, but it was real, raw. 7 years of waiting collapsed into that single moment. Luis whispered over and over, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And Rocco, ever the loyal soul, licked the tears off his face like none of it ever mattered. People in the crowd were crying. Strangers who had never met Luis wept like they had waited beside Rocco every single day. A mother held her child a little tighter. A grizzled trucker wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and muttered, "Damn dogs got more soul than half the people I know." The prison fence, cold and gray behind them, didn't seem so tall anymore. For once, it wasn't just a barrier. It was the backdrop to a reunion the world didn't know it needed. Luis didn't speak to the cameras. He didn't give statements. He didn't smile for interviews or sign any forms. He just stayed there, kneeling in the dirt, arms wrapped around the dog who had refused to forget him. And Rocco, he never looked away. Not once. He watched Luis the same way he'd watched that gate for 7 long years, with the kind of faith that doesn't waver, even when the whole world moves on. Mateo stood back, silent, watching. He'd grown up believing second chances were rare, maybe even impossible. But now, watching his brother stroke the dog's ears with hands that had known nothing but metal bars and cinder block walls for nearly a decade, he started to believe otherwise. They didn't go straight home. Luis asked to walk. So they did, him, Rocco, and Mateo, through the dusty fields that wrapped around the prison like forgotten pages. No leash, no map. Just miles of open space and a dog who trotted at Luis's side like the years had folded in on themselves. When they reached the highway, Luis looked up at the sky. "Feels too big," he said. Like I don't fit in anymore. Mateo didn't push. He just nodded. You will. They stayed in a motel that night. Mateo got a double room, but Luis and Rocco curled up together on one bed like no time had passed at all. Luis laid on his back, Rocco's head on his chest, just like in the photo. Mateo walked in quietly at one point to check on them and paused in the doorway. Luis was whispering. You waited all that time. You didn't give up on me. Why didn't you give up? And though Rocco couldn't speak, the soft thump of his tail on the blankets said everything. The days that followed were strange, beautiful, messy. Luis had to relearn how to exist outside, how to swipe a card instead of handling cash, how to fill out a job application without freezing at the box that asked about criminal history, how to sleep without hearing metal doors slam every few hours. And Rocco was with him through it all. At the DMV when the line was too long and the air too loud. At the diner where he panicked mid-bite and had to run outside for air. Even at his first therapy session, where he didn't say a word, but Rocco sat beside him the whole time, breathing slow and steady, reminding him that presence was sometimes enough. Mateo offered him a room at his place. It wasn't much, just a 2-bedroom apartment above a tire shop, but it was clean, safe, and quiet. Rocco adjusted quickly, found a soft corner rug and claimed it as his own. Luis struggled more. Some nights he sat on the edge of his bed for hours, eyes open, too scared to fall asleep in freedom. But always Rocco was there, laying near, breathing slow, reminding Luis that not all things disappear when you mess up. Luis started volunteering at the animal shelter. At first, it was just sweeping floors and scrubbing bowls, then feeding, then walks. He didn't say much to the staff, but the animals trusted him in a way that no RA ever could. They sensed it, the stillness in him, the knowing. Dogs who came in shaking and broken found peace sitting beside him. One of the volunteers, an older woman named Carol, took notice. Animals listen to you, she said one afternoon. You got that quiet kindness they understand. Luis didn't know what to say to that. Compliments still felt like shoes that didn't quite fit. But Rocco sat at his side, tail gently wagging, and Carol just smiled. A month passed. Then 2. Luis kept going, step by unsure step. Some days were easier. Some weren't. There were nights he still flinched when a door slammed too hard. Days he avoided crowded places. But Rocco was always there, like a compass, like a tether to the good parts of himself he was still learning to believe in. They started going to the park together. It was nothing fancy, just a stretch of grass with a small creek, but it became their place. Luis would sit on the bench. Rocco would stretch out beneath him. And together, they would just be. One day, a boy approached, maybe 6, maybe 7, scabbed knees and sticky fingers. He looked at Rocco and asked, "Can I pet him?" Luis hesitated. Rocco looked up, as if waiting for a signal. Then Luis nodded. "Yeah, you can." The boy dropped to his knees and gently touched Rocco's head. "He looks like a grandpa dog." Luis laughed, unexpectedly. "Yeah, he kind of is." The boy asked, "Did you have him since he was a puppy?" Luis looked down at Rocco. His voice caught. "No, but he had me." That night, Luis told Mateo he wanted to try speaking publicly. "About what?" Luis shrugged. "Everything, Rocco. Prison. Waiting. Second chances." Mateo was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I think people need to hear it." They started small. A community center. 15 people. Folding chairs. Luis stood in front of the group with Rocco beside him, his hands trembling just a little. He cleared his throat. "I spent 7 years locked up. And every day, I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But outside those walls, this dog, he waited. He didn't care about what I did. He only cared about who I was. And I think maybe we all need someone like that. Someone who waits. Even when we don't believe we're worth waiting for." He didn't cry. He didn't need to. The room cried for him. More invitations came. Schools, shelters, recovery groups. People wanted to hear the story of the dog who waited. And the man who finally came home. Luis didn't pretend to be a hero. He didn't sugarcoat what he'd done or the pain he'd caused. But he spoke honestly. And Rocco was always beside him. Never leashed, never prodded. Just there, present. A silent testimony to the idea that redemption doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens through connection, through time, through the relentless belief that people can change. One day, after a speech at a juvenile detention center, a boy approached him quietly. Shoulders hunched, eyes weary. "Seer," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "do you think someone like me could ever have a dog like that?" Luis knelt down, looked him in the eyes. "I think someone like you might be the reason a dog like that exists." And Rocco, like clockwork, stepped forward and gently licked the boy's hand. It didn't happen all at once. That's never how it happens. First, it was the hesitation before getting up in the morning. Then it was the shortness of breath on walks that used to be easy. Then the stares, not a refusal, just a pause. A look back at Luis, as if to ask, "You still need me, right? Because I'll try." Luis noticed. He noticed everything now. After losing so much, you learn not to look away from the little things. You learn to read the pauses like paragraphs, the limps like letters. And Luis, this man who had once missed all the signs in his own life, now caught them all. He added more blankets to Rocco's bed, switched his food to a softer blend, sat beside him for longer and longer stretches, just listening to the silence they shared. People were still calling, still asking for Luis and Rocco to visit, to speak, to share their story. But Luis started saying no more often. Not because the message wasn't important, but because Rocco came first now, always had. But now, Luis didn't want to miss a single breath. There was one last invitation, though, that Luis couldn't turn down. It came from the warden, the same man who had signed Luis's release. He was retiring and wanted to host a gathering. Nothing big, just the prison staff and a few select former inmates who had turned their lives around. Luis said yes, but only under one condition. "Rocco comes with me." The warden laughed over the phone. "Of course he does. He's the guest of honor." Luis trimmed Rocco's nails that morning, brushed out his coat until the old shine peeked through the grays. He lifted him gently into the passenger seat and left the windows cracked so Rocco could smell the road, the fields, the memories. As they pulled up to the gates, Rocco perked his head slightly, not with alarm, not even with tension. Just familiarity. Like part of him knew this place too well. Like he remembered every smell, every passing season. Luis parked. Sat for a moment with the engine off. Then leaned over and kissed Rocco's head. "You did it, old man," he whispered. "You brought me all the way back." Inside, the staff stood and clapped as they entered. Not for Luis. For Rocco. The dog walked slowly now, but with purpose. Luis at his side, steadying him when he staggered. The warden approached, tears already welling. He bent down, resting a hand on Rocco's back. "You never left, did you?" Rocco blinked up at him, then leaned into the touch. That night, when they got home, Rocco slept hard. No twitching, no dreams. Just steady breath and still pause. Luis watched him from the doorway for a long time, hands tucked under his arms, eyes soft with worry and reverence. The next morning, Luis didn't plan anything. No speeches, no visits, just time. He and Rocco walked to their bench in the park, the same spot where the boy with the sticky fingers once called Rocco a grandpa dog. They sat for hours. Luis didn't speak. He just let the breeze carry the silence. At one point, Rocco lifted his head and pressed it against Luis's knee, and that's when Luis started talking. Not loud, not rushed, just steady. He told Rocco everything he hadn't said before. About how he was afraid, of messing up, of falling again, of being someone who didn't deserve a second chance. About how the years behind bars had stripped pieces off him, but how Rocco had slowly, steadily helped put them back. He whispered thanks, apologies, hopes. Rocco didn't respond, but Luis knew he was listening. They stayed until the light began to fade. Then they walked home. Later that week, Mateo came by with groceries. He found Luis sitting on the floor. Back against the couch, Rocco curled in his lap like a child. Luis didn't look up. "Can't hear too well anymore," he said softly. "Doesn't eat much, but he still follows me from room to room." Mateo set the groceries down without a word, then sat beside his brother. Rocco blinked once, slow, then laid his head back down. "I've been thinking," Luis said. What if this is the whole point of it all?" Mateo frowned. "What is this? Him. Loyalty like that, love like that. What if that's the real sentence? Not the years I did inside, but this dog's heart that never gave up on me. What if he's the reason I survived it?" Mateo didn't answer. He just nodded, and the room sat still around them. Weeks passed. Rocco's world got smaller. The walks became short loops. His eyes clouded. Some nights he cried in his sleep, soft, low whimpers that made Luis's heart ache in places he didn't know could still hurt. But he never left his side. Not once. On the hardest nights, Luis would carry him to bed and curl around him like armor. He'd whisper, "You waited for me. I'll wait with you." And he meant it, every word. People still called, still emailed, asked for interviews, book deals, a podcast. Luis turned them all down. He wasn't looking for fame. He'd already found what he was chasing. A soul that stayed, a presence that proved redemption was real. Sometimes, late at night, Luis would imagine what it must have been like, those 7 long years. Rocco, sitting by the gates through heat, through storm, through snow, watching men come and go, hoping each time that the next face might be the one. Never giving up, not even once. He'd ask himself how a creature could love like that, and each time the answer was the same. Because some hearts are built different, because some spirits never unhook from the ones they choose, and because sometimes, just sometimes, the world hands you one single soul who refuses to leave, even when everything else does. One day, Louise opened the door to find a young girl on the porch, no older than 16, nervous, holding something wrapped in brown paper. "You don't know me," she said, "but my brother. He heard you speak at the center before he got out. He told me about the dog, about what it meant to him. He drew this before he passed." She unwrapped the paper. It was a sketch, rough but soulful. Rocco, sitting by the prison gate, eyes focused forward. A sunrise behind him. The words beneath read, "Some wait with teeth. Others wait with heart." Luis didn't know what to say. He just took the drawing gently in his hands, voice thick with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. She nodded, already tearing up. Then left without another word. Luis framed the drawing and hung it above Rocco's bed. He didn't know how many more days they had, but he knew they mattered. Each one. He knew that every breath was a chapter, every paw print a sentence, every look a reminder that sometimes love doesn't move fast to be real. Sometimes it just waits and waits and waits. One morning, Luis woke before the sun. The world outside was still, the sky painted in pale streaks of blue and silver. He sat up slowly and looked over. Rocco hadn't moved. His chest no longer rose. Luis didn't speak, didn't cry. He just reached out and planted gently on his old friend's side, fingers trembling. The room held its breath. For a long time he stayed like that, his head bowed, hand resting where warmth used to be. Eventually he stood, picked up Rocco in his arms like a child, wrapped him in the soft wool blanket from the couch, and carried him out into the yard. The sun broke over the horizon. Luis laid him beneath the oak tree where Rocco used to nap in the afternoons. He dug slowly, carefully, as if the ground itself needed convincing to let go. When it was done, he knelt beside the grave, took a deep breath. "You waited for me," he whispered, "so I'll carry you forward now." He placed the old photo, Luis lying in the grass with young Rocco, gently into the soil, and then one by one he laid stones on top, not to bury, but to mark the place where loyalty once lived, where love once waited, where redemption stood still and wagged its tail. Luis didn't leave that day with sorrow. He left with purpose, because some hearts don't break when they lose something, they break open, and in that opening, a new path begins. Luis walked forward, one step, then another, and though no pause followed behind him this time, he carried the sound of them in his bones. Forever,